Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the 401 Access Denied podcast, brought to you by Delinea. And I'm the host of the episode, Joseph Carson, Chief Security Scientist and Advisory CISO. And it's great to be here with you today. We have an exciting topic and a very important topic for many organizations. And I'm welcomed by an awesome guest, Dara Gibson. Welcome to the show. If you can give the audience a little bit of background to who you are, what you do, and some fun things about yourself.
Absolutely. So thank you so much. I'm joining actually from Phoenix, Arizona, where it's still 115 degrees out, even though it's October, right? It's an incredibly warm summer, but we make it through. And each year we always threaten to move. But I have been in cybersecurity a little over 5 years, and I found my niche of cybersecurity insurance. And my point in doing that was to really align with the expectations of incident response. And through that, I had to learn the language of cyber insurance and understand a claim and a regulatory and a claim, adjuster and how that fits in with the incident response. And through that, I became a certified cyber insurance specialist. And now working on my certifications in Arizona to make sure that I can speak more towards the language of, insurance as a whole, and really learning as I go. And I've joined Optiv about a year ago to really launch our insurability services program and move that forward to work to the best capabilities of our clients and help them navigate the programs of insurance.
Fantastic. Well, welcome to the show. And I think this is a really important topic for today. So, cyber insurance is something that many organizations have realized that it's a must-have. It's almost it's almost as mandatory as you need car insurance. When bad things happen, you need to be able to have the money to recover and continue your business. And the realization that when cyber attacks do happen, they are very costly and very impactful to the business. And the last thing organizations want to be doing is taking away from the business revenue in order to keep the business going, because sometimes that's their, the revenue they have to grow, to operate, to continue providing services. So it's something become very important. What have you seen for organizations? What's the motives that organizations have for obtaining cyber insurance that you've seen?
Well, actually, COVID, when everybody made that transition to work from home, then the insurance companies had to really transition their expectations. So a lot of people back 5 years ago were like, oh, I have insurance, I'm good. Or I have cyber controls, I'm good. I don't need both. Whereas because of COVID, that particular incident in time in history, that changed the industry overall and changed the cybersecurity industry overall. And people now began to see the fact that it wasn't an either or situation anymore. It really is a combination of the two. Building insurance into your risk management program and building controls into your risk management program. That's where the benefit actually truly came, because people can really withstand that event a lot more securely now because of the fact they've put those cyber measures into place, and they've also put the cyber insurance into place. So that financial risk as well as the mitigation of the security risks have been, diffused a little bit.
Absolutely. I think for many, they realize that, organizations who've had cyber incidents, especially, a lot of the increase in ransomware over the, recent years as well, in conjunction with people working from home and remotely, that increased those risks and the exposure that organizations had from ransomware. And as a result, organizations have realized that when those do happen, it is very costly. It's very expensive. Incidents are not cheap. And when they do occur, they dig into a lot of the company's profits and money. And they realize that they need to have that offset of, financial safety net, for say, that ability to make sure you've got some funds that you can dig into. Many years ago, this was, it wasn't something that organizations struggled with cyber insurance because years ago, it didn't cover the, let's say, the tangible value of data. It was very much, tied to the assets themselves.
Right.
And that has definitely changed.
Dating back to the 90s, that's where, the concept of data insurance came into play, because you were protecting credit card information and making sure that that financial transfer was taken care of back in the 90s. It wasn't until the, late 20 teens that the insurance company was like, oh, we now have to start financing these back end destructions of systems and networks
Hmm.
and laptops, and that as such, the actual physical property, right? And that's where
Absolutely.
that change of the insurance policy came from, just a liability to now an overall program of, financial transfer across the board. So it's no longer, it takes into account the first party and the third party across the, to make sure that everybody is protected in when that time comes. And they're also, insurance companies are also now providing a lot of proactive measures. So they're not just playing whack-a-mole at the end anymore. They're really providing additional services
Hmm.
and reaching out to vendors to say, hey, you know what? Delinea has great programs. Optiv has great programs. Let's work together with these vendors to make sure you're protected in the first place. And, down the line, you're also able to follow through with incident response services.
Absolutely. I think one of the biggest areas that I've seen a lot of insurance vendors go down the path is that they've been involving, and even some have acquired incident response services. So they're actually really getting more hands on into the incident response side of things. And what they're realizing, I think, in the past couple of years, what's happened is that as insurers dove into this, previously it was being covered, as you mentioned, things like property insurance was covering those physical assets, and now they realize they need to go beyond that. But they jump straight in, not realizing the frequency of the risk, not realizing the financial impact of the risk, and they got exposed significantly financially. A lot of insurers kind of were struggling, kind of how they can make money out of this. But I think over even the last year or two, I've seen a lot of maturity. They've started to really understand. They started getting more hands-on involved in incident response and working closely with those vendors and companies who provide those services, and they started realizing what things can actually prevent what if something was in place, what would have stopped the attack from happening. And that's what they're starting to
Well,
require.
we
They're
can't
starting,
say would stop the attack, would help
it would make
mitigate
it
or soften or
make it more difficult for it to happen,
right.
or more costly for the attacker, or more noisy. But it would
Hmm.
definitely make sure that it was not as easy, or it would to reducing that risk. So
And sometimes it's simple as cybersecurity awareness training, teaching your people not to click on that shiny
yeah.
object. And I
Or a
know it
strong a
sounds
strong password.
simplistic.
Sometimes
Yeah, right?
using unique passwords across multiple accounts. Sometimes it's
Oh, you
those
mean I
simple
can't use
things.
password 123 across all of my accounts?
Oh,
Huh.
that's
To hear clients still
unfortunately.
say that is perplexing.
Yes, and sometimes even when you get into the password policies, some still have 6, 8 characters online, even 8 characters. They're thinking it's that was the recommendation. What you think about?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a recommendation 10 plus years ago. We've come a long way since then. And I even get into sometimes you want to get to 16 characters and you want to get into passphrases. You want to change. And to your point, is a lot of that can be done through cyber awareness training into and joining that with good policy and practice as well. Combining those efforts into kind of, so you're actually making sure that you're not only educating, but you're putting the controls in place to make sure that it's happening, and you can measure it as well.
Well, and
Um,
practicing your
Absolutely.
incident response plan, having the people practice and understand how that process works, who to call, what is the insurance hotline,
Mhm.
what is the vendor's hotline, how do we start a response should the need arise, really understanding that it takes the people practicing these policies and procedures to
Yep.
truly understand how to impact the and lesser make a less of the severity of the incident as a whole.
Absolutely, because when you do need to act, let's say an incident does occur, you need to act with speed.
Hmm.
That's one of the most important things. The quicker you respond, sometimes the significant impact you reduce. So and that all results in costs.
Yeah.
The quicker you respond, the quicker you get mitigate, the quicker you eradicate the attackers. You get back to operation. That all has a massive cost, and time can make a huge difference. Sometimes I've even seen it, making a difference of hundreds of thousands of dollars, and even millions.
Hmm.
The quicker you respond. And this gets really important, is that when you do sign up with insurance policy, a lot of those policies do determine, one is how you respond to incidents, which vendors, might be certified as incident responders. So you want to make sure that you have if the insurance policy says here's vendor A, B, and C, that you're allowed to work with, you want to make sure you've got a relationship. You don't want to be the first time you're calling them is when an incident occurs. You want to actually, to your point, simulate it, practice it, know what things they will expect from you. What areas do you kind of recommend the audience? If you do get into the situation where the policy, the insurance policy is saying, here's the vendors. What would you suggest? Some of the preparation they get prepared for.
Well, and also understanding that you may have already built a relationship with a vendor that may not be on that incident response panel. Talk to your insurance company, talk to your broker, talk to your, the carrier as a whole. That company may already have insurance rates already pre-approved. So they may not be on the vendor panel, but they are already approved to be the vendor responder. And that gives the ability to utilize somebody that you already know and trust, and can utilize, and you can use them in your incident response. They may not be able to do the forensic side of the house because you always want that third party agnostic viewpoint of the forensics, but you can have somebody do your remediation and restoration based on your trust of your relationship that you've built. Again, this goes back to communication. Coach K, the basketball coach in the US, said, communication is key, and understanding that is across the board. No matter what sport, industry, business, it's communication. And talking to your insurance carrier, talking to your breach coach, talking to your own internal stakeholders. That's where this comes into play, and understanding how you work together and communicate these processes is the first step.
Yeah. And it was an interesting thing is, there's been a lot of chatter in the last year around, when an incident does occur, a lot of sometimes compliance will determine, such as I'm based in EU, compliance will say, you need to follow GDPR. Therefore, you need to notify Data Protection Authority within X amount of time, 72 hours. And now you're seeing insurance policies were saying, before you actually do anything, you need to contact the insurer before you do anything else. And I've had numerous conversations with different insurers about this particular clause that they're adding in the policies. It was really interesting that they were coming back and saying, actually, what that really does mean, because there was a lot of confusion in the industry, because to your point, the terminology sometimes is very different when we talk about in security world, and the terminology in the insurance world are not the same. And that's one thing I will say is, make sure you're on the same page of when you do sign a contract or you do get an insurance policy, make sure you're on the same page about what the terminology means, because sometimes we might be talking about two different things. And this specific area in the response, who to report it to first. So the insurer did say, so when they shared with me some of the process, they said that actually what they mean by that is that if you incur costs before you contact the insurer, that cost that you incur beforehand may not be covered. So that's what they're getting into. The point is that they want to make sure that they're involved, and when you make the claim, it's anything after the claim that's covered. So, and some things might be covered before, depending on basically how they define that policy. But it's not to say that you won't get covered. It's to say that they want to make sure that any cost that is covered is part of the claim process itself. So that's one thing they did clarify. Another,
and they also have relationships with the outside vendors. So you may have paid X dollars, and they've already built a relationship for Y dollars. So it's that slight difference that they're like, well, we could have covered this, but we can't cover that. So that's where understanding the terminologies and what's actually documented is critical.
Yeah, and even some of the policies, there was even the discussion online with social in the past year around. It was interesting because some companies who went down the path and they got insurance, and in the insurance policy they specifically focused around data recovery and remediation. And what they started realizing was that in the IT and security world, data recovery and remediation and insurance policy, their understanding of it means that it's actually restoring data. In the insurance world, it could also mean paying the ransom. So there was separate understanding about what data recovery meant.
And some people will have a ransom portion of their policy, and they've completely segregated that out of their data recovery part.
Correct. So. And as it gets into is really making sure that, and the point of that specific clause is to make sure that you're on the same page as the insurer when you're talking about what data recovery means. So getting into the fine print, getting into the details. And this brings me to the next question I've got for you is around...
Well, hold on. Before you go into that next point, is make sure that when you're talking on those communications that you're including your legal provider. You're
Absolutely.
including your insurance provider. You're including your vendor. So everybody is understanding the different terminologies and where each point lands.
Absolutely,
So,
because they come from very different viewpoints into
mm-hmm.
what security is. They come
Yep.
from a very much a traditional insurance background.
Mm-hmm.
Now they're bringing a lot of security experts in house as well to really help with them the terminology also and make sure
Mm-hmm.
that it is aligned. And this brings to another major topic, which is around exclusions, which has been getting a bit, over the year they've had the standard exclusions in place. My background, my first introduction into cyber insurance was in the maritime industry, ironically, and it was
Mm-hmm.
my kind of time in that goes back into the early 2000s. So when let's say when ransom meant that it was a pirate attacking a vessel, and that vessel had been attacked, and therefore a lot of it was, of course, the shipment, the containers that ship was
Mm-hmm.
carrying. But it was my introduction into what insurance meant. And in a lot of those piracy claims, it was this exclusion of terrorism and active war and stuff like that. And we're starting to see those types of, they've been standard in insurance policies for
Oh,
years,
for centuries. Yeah.
absolutely, for a long, long time. But now, of course, they've been added into the cyber insurance policies quite frequently. And we're starting to see how that's playing out. There's been some massive cases over the years. And I think the one that was notable early this year was the Merck case with NotPetya.
Mm-hmm.
And that made pretty big headlines because it did mean that, in that case, the way that the Supreme Court actually viewed it was that Merck was not a legitimate, military target. So
Right.
therefore, an active war clause in an insurance policy would not be justified. And it set up the two camps, those two camps that went separate directions in this, which meant that companies, so the insurers are thinking about, well, okay, any company we've insured that is not a military government legitimate target, that puts that clause at risk, that they may not have had the way out that they may have assumed. Because, and to be honest, in almost all cyber attacks, we can have some type of attribution back to nation state, which is unfortunate. Whether or not those criminals are acting as mercenaries or organized criminals or nation state backed. A lot of cases you point it to government or nation state because of location, geographical attribution, or they previously did work, or sometimes they work on behalf of, and sometimes they do their own thing. So it's always attribution is always very difficult. But then you got the other side of the camp, which is that these organizations who also have parts of their business as those military and government contracts. And now the clauses they're thinking about, well, okay, those clauses will apply. And they're starting to think about. So what's your view around the exclusions, and what other types of exclusions have you seen been put in policies?
When I've seen some of the exclusions be actually worded, my understanding is sometimes it has to actually be declared act of war. And then the policy still covers it because war has not been declared in that particular situation. So
Mm-hmm.
that way the policy still is upholding and has to honor it. And that's what happened in Merck as well, because that client was not an act of war, right?
Yeah.
And therefore that's where that transpired. Some of the other exclusions I'm seeing, they're fixing by putting new portions into their policy. So one part of the policy may exclude ransomware and ransom payments, but they've added in, portion of the policy saying, well, now we'll cover it because you bought this part of the policy. And
Yes.
so it's just, again, it's truly understanding what the policy is stating and where it actually is covered, because you want to make sure that you're not making that assumption. Oh, I'm totally covered. And then you're like, well, I wasn't covered
Absolutely.
at all.
Especially when they're coming on the renewals, because it used to be you get this one master policy that tended to cover everything, but now I've seen insurers have thousands of policies that get separated it out into these very micro policies for very specific things. So to your point, you might get data recovery, then you might get instant response, you might get, let's say, security awareness, you might get other types of even controls in place, you might get the ransomware payment, and where it used to be in the past, it used to be unlimited. It was
Right.
quite scary.
Or
It
you
was
have a limit. You're only allowed to use so much of that part of your policy. So
Yep.
a sublimit in that category, I guess, would be a more appropriate
Yeah.
terminology.
And then there's also the deductibles as well. You might have to have some upfront payment or cover, that you have to cover yourself. So it's quite interesting. So, to your point, absolutely, the policies are getting so very, very specific that as you're going through a renewal, you might want to make sure that you understand, does the policy still cover what you assume that you may be
Mhm.
getting in the past?
And again, that's including all of your stakeholders, your legal provider, your
Yep.
insurance carrier, your cyber vendor, because you want to make sure that all of those people are a part of the conversation. And you also want your internal stakeholders involved. That
Mhm.
means including your HR department. That means including your privacy department. And
Yep.
that means including, the IT and the technical people of your internal team as well, because there's a lot of those minute questions that you
Mhm.
may not be able to answer, but that other person can. And the data privacy component is critical because 2024 they're finally
Mhm.
saying, oh, well, now we need to actually abide by these data compliances that are being
Mhm.
set up. GDPR was like the first bird first, right? But now we've got a lot of 50 states in the US, and we're aiming for 50 different privacy policies.
All different, which is I wish it was more on a federal level, to be honest, because it was just one for
So does
everything.
everybody else, right?
Because otherwise you're just creating so much extra work, and that's why GDPR came around. I was one of the technical reviewers in GDPR, so I reviewed all of the early
Oh,
versions
wow.
and
Hmm.
then give the feedback into, is this technically possible? So that's what you get into. I wish I could go back and change a few things, honestly, but it was a great foundation. And then, of course,
Hmm.
your point is like other governments have taken the same step. In the
Hmm.
U.S., it's the states have taken the same step. And what I have found though is that a lot of these cyber insurance policies do kind of overlap with a lot of compliance and regulations as well.
Hmm.
So I think what one thing I do find is that if organizations do have some compliance that they had to meet, whether it being a PCI compliance for a financial
Hmm.
institution or HIPAA for medical or SOC compliance, or even ISO and NIST framework, I do find there's a lot of overlap. Do you find any specific ones that might help more, or if you do find organizations already compliant with some regulation, that it does help them accelerate the ability to obtain cyber insurance?
Yes, in the unusual aspect of insurance mapped their own expectations. So some insurance carriers pulled CIS, some pulled
Mm-hmm.
NIST, some pulled
Yep.
CMMC. And as you said, there's so many different frameworks, but you will notice, as you said, that if you've completed a SOC 2 exam or you really are compliant with PCI, a lot of the times you can answer your questionnaires and be like, oh yeah, we have that in place. Oh
Mm-hmm.
yeah, we've practiced our tabletop exercise for our
Yep.
incident response. Oh yeah, we've protected our data from that component of
Mm-hmm.
it. And so that's where the overlap does really positively impact your
Mm-hmm.
insurance, because you can answer those questionnaires a lot more significantly,
Mm-hmm.
with ease and efficiency. And that's where that allows you to have that flexibility to say, yeah, we've answered that.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times though, the insurance industry has all of their own expectations and their own wording of, well, this company just wants MFA, this company wants MFA on the admin rights, this
Mm-hmm.
company wants it on the overall, this company wants it. So really creating cohesive structure in the industry as a
Mm-hmm.
whole, which is why PCI came, which is why
Yep.
HIPAA came, because they wanted to create that overlying umbrella of, cohesive comprehension. And I think in the next few years, we'll see that with the insurance
Mm-hmm.
industry as well, because there are so many frameworks and controls that you can put in place. And just because one person names it one thing, and with the fancy acronyms that
Yeah.
everybody likes to appreciate, right, they all can have the same broad
I think
understanding
that
and
would be
meaning.
great, actually, to come, to have a consolidated insurance industry framework
Hmm.
that basically means that, and it also means it makes it easy transferable. Maybe one year I decide to change insurers, and therefore I don't need to go through the same process again to obtain it. I've already went through it once. Why do I do
Hmm.
it again? And it means it's transferable, and that makes it much more standardized. I think that'll be a great approach to have a cyber insurance framework that allows you to at least understand about that you can prepare for as well. So you're not actually having to find out the first time when you do contact and try to obtain insurance, that you already can have some type of framework that you can actually already
Right.
check beforehand, and then you can choose which insurer to go to
Which insurer
afterwards.
company? Yeah.
So
Well,
absolutely,
and
that makes
look
a
at
lot
the
of
auto
sense.
industry.
Yeah.
The auto industry says you have to have airbags, you have to
Yep.
have seatbelts, you have to have brakes in your car, right? And then so now we're in the same situation with the cyber insurance industry saying, you've got to
No,
have these controls in place. It creates a better security framework.
absolutely. Rather than one insurer saying you need brakes, but you don't need an airbag, and the other
Right.
insurer saying, you need an airbag, but you don't need a seatbelt. So, a standardization does help, and it means that expectations are a lot more easier to
hmm
follow. What types of security controls are being required? Well, like what solutions? You mentioned MFA. What other types of things are you seeing insurers require in order to become insurable?
Detection and response, really understanding that your endpoint agents or your network agents have that detection and response capabilities. And sometimes it's easy enough just to have it managed by an
Mm-hmm.
outside vendor, because now you're completely covered 365.
Mm-hmm.
Some businesses, you're still going to close at 5 o'clock, and your security guy may leave at 5 o'clock. Well, at 6 p.m., the threat actor knows that Fred went home. And so having that overall 24/7 capability of detection
Yep,
and response is crucial.
absolutely.
Cybersecurity awareness training I've seen on multiple insurance
Mm-hmm.
carriers. That's one of the key elements. One, as I mentioned, one coming up is privacy for 2024,
Mm-hmm.
because a lot of lawsuits came into play, and it wasn't the ransomware or the business email compromise this year. It was the lawsuits from the privacy regulations.
Mm-hmm.
And so insurance is now responding and saying, we need to be better at privacy compliance
Mm-hmm.
to make sure that that's also covered in the insurance policy as well. So, I mean, there's so many aspects of it.
Yep.
MFA, privileged
Yeah,
access
privileged
management.
access. I've seen about. It's like the more mature policies. I've seen privileged access management becoming
Mhm.
mandatory. Some of the other insurers are still catching up. They're not quite there yet, but they are starting to update their policies to start including more
Well,
of.
and the insurance industry needs to understand that that's not a light switch. If
Yeah.
you have a multi-billion-dollar industry, you can't just turn on your privileged access management. That takes months to deploy and implement
Mhm.
and make sure it's fine-tuned to make sure it's working to the
Yeah.
best capabilities of the program. So that's where the insurance industry is going to have
Mhm.
flexibility to say, okay, this company is working on it. They are deploying it. They are making sure it's in place,
Mhm.
and have those be the course of action that's a
Yeah.
positive realm.
So what types of, if an organization is going down the path, one of the other things I mentioned, as well, is that most organizations, their security team is 20% of one of their IT resources. It's not, sometimes it's their part-time job or just a responsibility that they have. So I think for many, it's important to get outside help. It's important to
hmm
partner with a provider who can provide more, was it 24/7, 365.
hmm
And also in many regions, sometimes you're located to headquarters, but you might not have uh, resources available to all locations.
Right.
So it's really important to make sure you've got availability there. The next area is what types of resources does an organization need to get cyber insurance? And roughly how long does it roughly take? Is it like a couple of weeks? Is it something you do self assessments? Do you need to involve multiple departments? What type of kind of resources would a company expect?
So our Optiv in particular
Hmm.
has noticed that a lot of our clients are getting their renewal notices 120 days out, which gives them the flexibility to utilize Optiv to say, "Hey, help me with this
Hmm.
program," right? And
Hmm.
so 120 days is a long time, because the insurance companies are now looking and saying, our questionnaires are no longer just 10 questions. It's
Hmm.
not a 30-day portion. So
Yep.
120 days is where they're looking to say, you know what, that gives the clients the opportunity to look at their program and
Hmm.
understand, where are their gaps? How can
Hmm.
we remediate these gaps and put the appropriate measures in place to
Hmm.
make them more insurable, and have that insurability concept. So I've seen, some companies out at 120 days,
Hmm.
others are still at 45,
Yep.
but really giving that strong code of, here's your renewal date,
That's a
it must
highly
be done by
it's a
that
good
time.
indication about what you're typically expecting. 120 days
hmm
is, it's a long time. I've seen similar. I've seen, on the smaller side of things, the small companies doing self assessments. I've seen it take, anywhere up to a month. Sometimes it's very
hmm
quick. But on the larger side of things, I've seen very, very deep risk assessments, third party risk assessments, penetration
hmm
tests, and seen, even up to 6 months plus, where it's taken to get cyber insurance, and sometimes, some organizations might not even get it because insurers are
Yeah.
becoming more selective.
Or they're
And
getting a very small policy. So
yes,
where they may have gotten 10 million in the past as a part of their
mm,
coverage, now the company's saying, okay, well, now we can only do 5.
yeah,
And that's where you now have to find a second insurer to do your tower policy and build back in additional
absolutely,
policies to get you back up to that 10, because you still have a business that's growing and thriving. So you can't minimize your coverage. You still need your, your larger excess policies. But
absolutely.
and you also have to understand that it's not just the maturity of the insurance company.
Mhm.
It's also the company, that the insured company that's becoming the
Yeah,
client, right? Because they could be a smaller one-man shop, and they're not going to take 120 days to renew their policy. They're
mhm.
going to be able to do that self-assessment on the website and truly understand. So it's the maturity of the insured client as well as the maturity of the insurance company.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of organizations with many policies to cover
Mm-hmm.
different things, and a lot of some of the times it's due to the complexity of the business.
Yeah.
You get large pharmaceutical companies that might have something for here's our medical machines line of business, and therefore it's a different risk than things
And
like
this cybersecurity policy covers that portion of our
because
business.
it's more
Yeah.
specific to hardware to the asset.
Mm-hmm.
It might be property.
And the operational technology
Correct,
portion of
correct.
it. Mm-hmm.
Versus the let's say the biomedical side of things, or vaccine side, which is much more on the data side. Therefore, you need to
Or
have
the
it's
intellectual property
the
side.
intellectual property, the algorithms and stuff, and the
Mm-hmm.
math that makes it happen. So therefore, it's a very different type of policy as well. So I've seen organizations that do have many different policies that they have to look
Mm-hmm.
into, and sometimes many different teams that has to work on it. So it can take a lot of time, resources. What other things are you seeing? What's the trend that you're seeing in the industry? What's looking forward in the future?
As we mentioned previously, some of the trends we're seeing is the insurance industries are taking a much more control of the cyber vendors that they're working with, and
Mm-hmm.
as you said earlier, they're purchasing them up, they're acquiring
Yeah.
them. So to me, that's a little odd, because it could be a conflict of interest of,
Mm-hmm.
hey, we provide service and we provide insurance. So if somebody can, correct me on that one, I'm
Yeah.
happy to have that conversation. But to me, it's a little, maybe a point of conflict. But I do see that as a trend that's coming. But
Mm-hmm.
I also, in the positive light, I am seeing the conversation between the insurance, the legal vendors, and the cyber vendors really coming into play, and
Mm-hmm.
understanding that three-pronged approach is helping the clients out much more efficiently, and
Absolutely.
creating a strong foundation in the front end helps them in the back end, especially with the new SEC regulations coming to play
Mm-hmm.
for publicly traded companies in the US.
That's
That
significant.
4-day that time frame is significant. So they're going to need a lot of measures in place and a lot of phone numbers on hand to make that come into play.
And you want to have it practiced, because to meet that 4 day, you will not do it without
Mm-hmm.
practice, without simulation, without having those relationships and connections and the context. It's going to be difficult. I've seen organizations even trying to figure out after a month what the root
Yeah.
cause of the incident was, let alone 4 days. so, um, so that makes a massive difference. Absolutely. I'm also saying, the industry is definitely maturing. That's the
Mm-hmm.
great thing. They're starting to have much more tangible, quantifiable risk data, which is
Yeah.
definitely a positive thing. And they're starting to mature the policies. They're starting to understand about what really is cyber risk. I think one of the important things that I share with the audience as well. One of the things I've found doing a lot of research in this area, and just recently released a very detailed report, is that it's important that cyber insurance is not cybersecurity.
No.
That's the confusion I've seen a lot, thinking maybe I'll just get in cyber insurance because then I don't have to do these cybersecurity best
You
practices.
won't get insurance anymore
Exactly.
without putting cybersecurity in place.
And it's important that it is the financial safety net.
Mm-hmm.
Cybersecurity is the brakes in the car. It is the seatbelt. It is the airbag. It is driving according to the rules and putting the best practices
Mm-hmm.
and following the right things in place. Cyber insurance is a financial safety net to help you recover quickly, to help you have the right resources that you need to get back up into business. And when that car is no longer functional, you get a replacement car to keep going. It's that difference, and they go together. it's a combination of both, which is important. You can't do one
And
without the other.
proactive versus reactive. Going to your medical
Absolutely.
doctor for your annual exam, keeping you healthy and taking some vitamins is a lot easier and cost effective than going to the emergency room to have that emergency fix. And so
Absolutely. Yeah.
and again, it's all the power of the dollar, the power of mitigation, the power
Mhm.
of being proactive.
Absolutely. And one of the important things is this is where the CFO and the organization does really well. They understand
Mm-hmm.
financial risk. So
Mm-hmm.
sometimes, they can become your best friend when you're going down this path because they understand how to negotiate these types of policies. And they understand about the financial mechanics of the organization as well. So definitely, as organizations are going down this path, the risk officer, the CFO, the business owners, they help you provide that quantifiable data side of things and can help you build the package that you need, the right package,
Right.
plus also make sure you're able to understand the needs of the business and what type of insurance you need to cover it as well.
And it goes back to our previous conversation
Mhm.
of communication.
Yep.
Because the CFO knows their component and the IT knows their component and the DPO knows their component, if they're not communicating across everything, it's still going to be siloed and not going to work
Mhm.
efficiently. Whereas as they communicate together, they're also communicating now with their outside stakeholders. And that's where a complete risk management program comes into play. And I think
Absolutely.
that communication is, what makes the policies that much stronger.
And this is a great opportunity to break those silos down. It's a
Mm-hmm.
great opportunity to have those conversations and get to the point where you're all working together, and realize that cybersecurity is no longer just an IT problem. It's actually a
Mm-hmm.
business cross-functional problem,
It's a
and
business
therefore
risk.
we need to work together in those areas.
Hmm.
So I think that's definitely a great. One of the things is also I've seen is a lot of boards requiring the organizations that they represent because they might sit in multiple boards and they're hearing it from other organizations. So you should be prepared that when your board meets the next time, that the question that CEO or the question the board might have from the CISO or might have from the director of IT and security, they might have the questions about what is our situation with cyber insurance? Do we have it? And if we don't, what are we going to do about it? So be prepared that those
Right.
conversations will happen. And you want to already, if you haven't done the path, you want to make sure you're already starting to think about it and start inquiring and at least becoming knowledgeable about what it
Hmm.
means, what the terminology means. So at least when the CEO or the board comes to you for those answers, and they want the answer, they want answers. They don't want
And they
let's
don't
say,
want
oh,
all the fancy
I'll
acronyms. They don't want all the high level, intricate knowledge,
yeah.
language that you're like nobody else understands. They want to understand where you're coming from.
Absolutely. Dara, it's been fantastic having you on. This has been a really intriguing, exciting conversation and
Great
something that
conversation. Thank
organizations
you.
definitely will have that. Any final path or direction you would have to the audience? What would be the first step? What would be the first thing that they should do? Either if they're coming up for renewal, maybe they already got a policy, or they're going down the first time. What would be your advice for the audience?
Well, read your declarations page of your policy. I mean, they make it very simple, so it's usually
Mm,
right in the front of the policy because that'll list everything that's covered and included in the policy. Because you want to make sure that if you've read, you must have MFA for this portion of your policy to work. Make sure you
mm,
understand what that means. Now that also opens up the opportunity for you to talk to your cyber vendor and say,
mm.
we don't know what MFA truly means for our organization.
Yep.
Is it just truly understanding having that second code on your phone, or
Yep.
is there a token? Is there have, know,
Mm,
and understand where does this come into play? So having that understanding what your declarations page
mhm.
says and understanding what it means for your organization, that's where your first step lies. And then
Absolutely.
in a cyber event, knowing the numbers to call,
Mhm.
the who to contact
Yeah.
cuts down on that
And
business
having it
interruption
having it
claim.
offline as well in a backup or printed sometimes because I can't tell you many times I've involved in incident response where the actually incident response plan is also encrypted with a ransomware. So always make sure that you do know it either in your head or you've got it easy accessible in an offline store. And one other
I
thing I'd
had one
recommend.
client one time actually had the whole printed off in IR plan in the back of his car. He'd kept a binder in the back of his car. He's like, if we're offline, I have to have a printed copy. And sure enough, his trunk of the car policy came into play.
That could be a I've seen it, those types of practices being a big savior.
Mm-hmm.
And one other thing I'd recommend for the audience as well is don't try to go it alone. Reach out and contact the likes of Optiv and find out, what help you can get, what you can do to prepare, because that makes a massive difference. Get people in the community and the network and reach out who have done this before. Because it will definitely make it much easier for you, and they can already help you with some templates and some
and don't
guidance.
Hit delete.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's been fantastic having you on. I've really enjoyed the conversation. Really excited.
Me too. Thank you for having me.
It's been a pleasure. So for the audience, again, this is the 401 Access Denied podcast. We're really trying to bring you educational, knowledgeable, thought leadership content, and I really do hope that you find this valuable and insightful. Again, tune in every 2 weeks. We always have a great guests and exciting topics. And again, stay safe, take care, and look forward to hearing from you again. So take care. Thank you.
Bye-bye.